Hello, and welcome to Magic is Real, the podcast where we talk about all things metaphysical and spiritual. Today, I am interviewing the wonderful Chris Bennett, who goes by the Tarot Medium. Welcome, Chris. Thank you so much for being here. And before we get started, I just want to do the little opening again. Is if you like this podcast, if you like this episode, please hit the like button, comment below if you have comments, but also even just a little heart emoji helps to support the podcast for free. I also want to tell you that I know so many of you are here for the near-death experiences. There will be more. I'm not deviating from that. It's just been scheduling and order of things. I'm super excited to talk about mediumship and tarot and specifically Chris's journey. He is such an amazing speaker, eloquent, interesting, has all kinds of interesting anecdotes. But I also just want to let you know I'm not deviating. It's just been a scheduling thing. So there will be more near-death experiences. And without further ado, that was a lot of ado. Welcome, Chris Bennett. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. Wow, I feel I have to step up to plate with my articulation on everything.
I really
But
hyped you up. I really hyped you up. So now the pressure's on. Well, I know you'll have no problem. I have followed you on Instagram for a little while. You're very poised. You have such great wisdom. And then I listened to your podcast interview with like I said, I had a migraine this morning. Oh, Jessica Lynn, who I just interviewed. And I loved the interview with her. So I would love to start by having you tell us your journey into mediumship for starters, because you started very young as a medium. And I'd love to hear about your background, whatever you're comfortable sharing about your childhood, what you were like, what your spiritual beliefs may or may not have been, etc., in any way you'd like to share it.
this is a deep dive. So I did
Yeah.
start quite young. I'm one of the weird ones. I find a lot of people as we get older, they tap into their spirituality or they find religion or they find CrossFit or veganism, one of those things as we get older to really bulletproof their ethics so that they can live out their life a little bit more meaningfully. And when I was a really young kid, I lost all my grandparents except for one. And I had such a strong connection with my grandmother, even though I'd never met her physically. She died at 38 from lung cancer, and I'd heard how psychic she was, and that was a gift that even on her deathbed, her children would get a pack of fresh cards each, pull out a card and hold it close to their heart, and she would tell them what it was without them even showing them the back of the card. So I'd heard about all these little snippets, and then also communicating with those who have passed on. And I didn't really think anything of it. I was a little kid and I started drawing pictures of what I'd imagined she'd look like. I'd start drawing pictures of, a bubble around my family. And my mom would be like, "Oh, what's that?" I'm like, "Oh, it's grandma protecting you." And she's like, "What's she protecting me from?" I'm like, "Something that you're going through that I don't think I'm allowed to know about." So there was a lot of things that my mom had been going through that were family oriented that I saw my grandmother there. And I thought that mediumship would be more like what Hollywood would portray, where you see somebody physically, tangibly there, um, giving lots of symbols and signs, but it's a lot of a translucent portrayal of what somebody would look like in the afterlife. And they're quite translucent. And it takes a slippery state of mind to entertain that. And then to see and hear, sometimes scent comes through, certain memories will pop in, and then it's like a high speed flash of video that you have to make sense of. And the first impression is always right. So I started at 17 with a professional mediumship reading. My best friend, Brough, Perkins, broperkins.ca, if you want to check him out. He's one of the most underrated psychic mediums out there. And he started at 15 because a lot of the world was overwhelming for him. And he started doing professional readings. He's been doing them since. And he said, "You know what? You need to do this for a living." And I'm like, "It's too unconventional. It's too weird. I want that corporate lifestyle." And when I got to the top of that heap, I realized that it didn't equate to happiness, and it wasn't conducive for healing. I really wanted the connection, which is what drew me to that experience first and foremost. And then my sister, who made it through, was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer due to her firstborn baby, there was a complication, and months later, she couldn't figure out what was wrong, and I troubleshot with a medium friend, and we figured it out prior to her being diagnosed. So there was that rebirth back into, okay, that's what's most important. And I couldn't look at my corporate job the same anymore. I don't even do it anymore. It's just something that has shaped who I am and made me realize what's crucial and what's superficial.
Yeah, thank you. That was beautifully told. I think I've talked about this before, but I want to say it again. I love that you touched on how it's not like in the movies.
No.
It's not. And for some people, it kind of is. I think for some people that have really, really high sensitivity and they might see things more than they feel things. But I think what people need to understand is that most of the time, it's something that it's more of a feeling that we get inside of ourselves or within our mind's eye. You said you do see sort of transparency. I don't see that. I just feel them. In fact, I feel them right now, because when we talk about them, sometimes they start to come forward, and ugh. And but it's I can feel it. It feels like a electricity or energy, and it doesn't always. Sometimes it's more like you said. The first thing that comes in is the thing, and it comes in so fast that if you overthink it, you might miss it.
Hmm.
I'm guilty of it all the time of like, it comes in so fast, I don't trust it. And then I start to try to sort of, my brain starts to get involved, and that's where we lose it. So it's very visceral and it's very, but also very subtle in a lot of time, in a lot of ways. Do you agree with that for you?
Absolutely. You have to trust that first instinct in what, and otherwise your ego is trying to force it. And I always say,
Yeah.
a good reading is like a fart. If you have to force it, it's going to be shit.
Oh, I love it because I do that sometimes. I find myself in some kind of slightly self-doubting mood and then it doesn't go as well. You just kind of got to let it flow. You just got to
Mhm.
go and just not censor yourself and go. So, I would also love to hear about how tarot fits in and how you became interested in tarot cards, how they work, and how you use them in your practice.
Yeah, so tarot is seen as like the psychic training wheels. It's pretty much like dryer lint when it comes to parapsychology, but it's steeped in a psychological narrative. So there's 78 cards, which I found interesting. If you had told me as a kid that I'd be utilizing tarot cards and a psychic ability, I'd be like, no way in hell. I'm somebody who can do a reading without cards. But what the cards do is give me a concise narrative to really hone in my paranormal ability and see very specific things about perhaps what is relating to your circumstances. Usually it's that first impression that's very accurate. And it gives me a snapshot into perhaps who you are, what you're doing, where you're coming from, and a potential to where you're going. None of that is written in stone. I really honor free will. So when I see somebody surrendering their free will and asking me to tell them who is the best person to go forward with, I'm like, you know the answer to that. I can give you validation that this person may be present in your life, but it's up to you to decide what's best for you. So tarot cards, what I found interesting is there's 78 of them. On a perfectly cut diamond, there's 78 facets that allow the perfect amount of light to reflect. In psychology, there's 78 inflections of the human psyche. In classic um, we'll say Catholicism, there's 78 angels and 78 demons. And these all represent the highs and lows of humanity. So what I've thought when I was a kid was angels and demons being external forces. And I think to a degree they still are, but it's a lot of what's making up our own components because human beings are a combination of angel and animal. So we hold a lot of those components within us. And so each of these cards, from what I've learned over many years, is that they each represent an inflection of our own psychological makeup. So there's 78 cards that reflect the highest values of humanity, and then also values and vices, essentially.
Oh wow. You said that so well. It's really, really interesting. I dabble in tarot. I have a hard time with the lot putting the pieces kind of together a little bit, but I read them for myself and sometimes pull them for friends, and it's pretty incredible. And so I want to ask you what I think a lot of people wonder is, well, how does that work? So it's not the cards that are magical. It's
No.
the way that spirit allows us to use them. So I'd love to hear the way that you would word that.
So something that I've also realized in doing this work full time is that there's no such thing as random and there's no such thing as death. I think both are an illusion from what I've seen. And what happens is that you're not having spirits speak to you through the cards. That's impossible. It's more of that synchronization, synchronicity rather, of when you're writing something down and somebody in the background says the exact words that you're writing on the paper. You're like, what is going on here? It tells you you're on the right track. So with mediumship, I rarely use cards, but what I do is I'll get them to reiterate what I'm perhaps seeing and sensing. So it gives me a reiteration. So I'll be like, oh, I'm seeing January and the color green. So that tells me a Capricorn. They'd be born earlier in January or later December. And then I'll pull a card and there will be an earth-based pentacles something, and I'm like, oh, yep, Capricorn. And that will reiterate immediately. Or I'll ask, what did this person do for work? And I'll start seeing snippets of information that are very, very specific. And I'll about to communicate them, I'll pull a card to, see if that aligns with what they may or may not do for work. And these cards don't have jobs assigned to them, but what I'll see is a reiteration of that aligns with what I'm seeing. And so that's how that works. It's like going through an art gallery on shuffle with somebody who's very sensitive and has curated that museum many, many, many times. So when you're familiar with all the different aspects of what those card not only meanings are, but how they relate to each other, that gives you an orchestra of information coming from an unbiased source that's completely on shuffle.
Right. And is spirit sort of, or your higher self guiding you to pick the card, or how does that work from a spiritual perspective?
So prior to each client, I shuffle. I cut the deck into three. I reverse one of them. I put them all into a perfectly arrayed spread, and I use my left hand without overthinking it. When you overthink it, that's when
Yeah.
you're really trying to choose something. But I just completely just pick a card, flip it over, and start communicating exactly what I see. And it more so during life readings, that's come in handy because this creates again a concise application for reading someone in a smaller time window. So at first I was doing an hour reading, and by the end of it, I was finding myself repeating information. I was just kind of going through many different aspects on repeat, and this gives me a concise window to look into in somebody's life and start to see very specific information that generally applies to them, and actually specifically applies to them. So it's quite interesting. And again, it's the combination of what they each represent and how they interact with each other that gives you a snapshot into somebody's life and what they may or may not be going through.
Yeah. Do you believe in manifestation?
To a degree, yes. Actually, short answer, yes. But
Yeah.
what I've noticed is that that has been watered down to a lot of people who are just wanting things for themselves.
Hmm.
And what I've learned about manifestation, which I try not to even use that word anymore because it's been oversaturated by people trying to sell you something to get you to want things. And I've noticed that, yes, there's a lot of people whose basic human needs are compromised and they're in very sticky situations that they need to really generate a higher frequency in order to pull in things that would meet their needs. And that I think would be the basis of manifestation in needing something for yourself. However, what I've realized is when you want something for someone else, that's the essence of prayer. And
Hmm.
so that in itself will generate a higher frequency for your own emotional state and then your own cognitive ability, and you're attaching both your cognitive and emotional state and sending it to someone else, truly thoughts and prayers. However, that comes back to you, and if you do it selflessly, and if you can add an act of service in there without broadcasting it or telling anyone about it, that in itself will come back and shape your perception and give you almost that bug zapper quality where you draw things in. But you have to do it selflessly and you have to do it for other people and you have to do it without broadcasting it.
Yeah. I asked that too because I wonder about specifically with cards too. And I heard a manifestation coach say that she reads cards, but also she's like, but also remember they're kind of a reflection of what you're manifesting. So, um, don't take it as like the final word. This is what's going to happen, and there's no changing it. Now, we also have free will. So I'm always interested in the argument, not the argument, but uh, the idea of free will versus being able to create your reality. What do you think about that? If that makes sense, it's kind of convoluted.
Oh, I love free will. I think that in itself is the paintbrush for creating your own reality. I think it's again, be careful what you wish for, because I've been in so many fantastic circumstances that once you get into that and you're in that circumstance, you're like, oh, okay, I should have been a little bit more specific here.
Yeah,
Um, or you realize that that's not the essence of not only happiness, but it may be lacking a spiritual component when you get to the other side of what you're wishing for.
yeah,
So that's what really drew me into immersing myself in this work is connection with people, a healing aspect, authenticity, and then providing validation. So that's something, those are my words that really seem to be coming back and really shaping the core of my work for other people.
yeah. And I'm really excited to delve into that because that's the meat. That's why I do this work. I love the beauty of being able to communicate. We're all souls, so we're able to communicate with other souls, and we all are able to do this. Some are more sensitive than others. But first, I just wanted to ask, what do you think about pendulums or divining rods? Do they work? Do they
I
work? That's
think
the question. Yeah.
the person holding them works.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think anytime you see that, it's little vibrations in their own nervous system that are either pulling it in or pushing it out. And then pendulums, again, it's all entirely your own nervous system. So I think there's people can definitely suspend their ego from getting involved in that work, and that's where you'll get a truly psychic experience. And I think that's possible with any tool set. You don't really need specific tools to do this work, but if you find it to be helpful, by all means go for it, as long as there's an authenticity to it and you are removing your ego to ensure that you're being a conduit for information. But I think those specific tools, there's a nervous system reaction, and that can be tricky because that physicality is within you, and so it's a lot harder to reduce your ego to be a conduit.
Yeah, I think so too. I actually bought some divining
Mhm.
rods just to see, and I'm like, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if they work, but I just notice, okay, but I'm breathing. So they're so sensitive that when I'm breathing in, they're closing. When I'm breathing out, they're opening. Or
Mhm.
even just thoughts of like wanting an answer. So to me, I'm not as sold on them. I just wanted to know what you thought. I still think they're kind of fun, but I always end it going, this isn't. I just kind of do it for fun. I wanted to try it out. So I'm interested. That's an interesting thing. I also wondered, like, if I stay really still, is it responding to even my psychic thoughts? Because I think that's a thing too. So
If
that's
you plant
interesting.
them firmly in something that you're not touching
Yeah,
and they move, that's when you've sold me on it. But I
exactly.
have
Yeah.
also, there was a point that we were looking at, my partner and I were looking at buying land and it was undeveloped. And we went through all the bells and whistles. We were this close to making it happen. And then it was just way too much work. And a lot of the signs that I was paying attention to externally were saying, well, somebody else's partner and them did it and they said it destroyed their relationship. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna listen to that. But what I found interesting was we would have had to dig a well for water. And I was on board financially. I was like, let's do this. And I'm like, wait, how do we guarantee that the first drill is going to get water? And all the local people, everyone in this beautiful city that we will be moving to one day, has sent me the information for this person who's a water witch,
Mm,
um, and a male. Interesting, which is always fantastic and weird because you expect the word witch to be
yeah.
like some lady with dowsing rods being like, "There's water over here."
Yeah.
Um, Water witch man who's got a very professional website and a business card and using dowsing rods, and they're like, he's 100% accurate. He always finds water. I'm like, hmm, hmm,
Yeah. I
hmm.
keep thinking these are probably really good for finding water, but I'm not so sure about telling the truth because they're telling different things. I'm asking the same question and it's doing different things. So, but I still find them fun and interesting. So yeah, I would love to delve kind of into your life as a medium. So, like for example, I can say for me, I don't walk around in medium mode. And I'm pretty, I have a normal life. Occasionally a spirit will come in when I'm with somebody new and I know they have a message, but do you have to set boundaries or do you just see things randomly or do you actually intend? Because I usually tell people, I know Jessica said that Jess said this on the podcast where it's like people are always like, what do you feel in the room? And I'm always like nothing because I'm not in medium mode. I haven't set my intention. I haven't asked spirit to come in. So occasionally I will feel something, or they'll ask me and I'll say, oh, nothing. And then all of a sudden I feel something because we've asked. How does that work for you in your regular life?
I am living, breathing, healthy boundaries.
Yeah.
That's me. I've always had that, we'll call it a resilience, because if there's emotions that are too volatile or any external circumstances, I have an oil slick around me where I'm unavailable.
Yeah.
I've been like that since I was a little kid. So a lot of people think that this work can be quite taxing emotionally or psychologically. I'm like, oh no, I sometimes at the end of a very long day, I'll need a saltwater bath to just, let those emotions flow, but I don't let anything accumulate for me. And this gift is not on tap like a cheap beer. This is a top shelf brand where you can sit down and sip and get to know each other and open up. And there's a conducive element to it that's required based on the client as well. I need them to be in a neutral emotional state to also allow information to flow through them and into me and out and vice versa. So it's a conduit that we're creating. Um, Interestingly enough, though, when I was going through the Las Vegas airport many years ago, very early in the morning, and I didn't realize it was Thanksgiving in the United States. And that's a very busy time at all airports, I've realized. And there's all these wonderful ladies wearing bedazzled crosses all over their shirts and just all the people wearing all the bling and jewelry. I was like, this is a lot in the morning, and I'm kind of entering a trance-like state to just get through a mass of people unexpectedly. And when I got to the TSA officer to go through security, I kind of opened my eyes and looked at him, and he had these translucent, beautiful origami shapes behind him. And then I could see a lady that looked like she would be his mother. And there was ornate flowers all behind her. I can't, almost like chrysanthemums. And she was kind of going like this behind him. And I was like, oh, do I say something? And the look on my face was just, oh, wide-eyed, admiring, trying not to look at the translucent lady behind him. And I was like, oh, I've really entered that state of mind in a very busy place. So I just said, oh, you have absolutely beautiful eyes. I feel like there's somebody really looking out for you here today. And he's like, it's my mother. I'm like,
Then you knew he was open.
yeah,
Yeah.
but I didn't know
You
he
didn't
was
say.
open. That was my way of saying you have, like, his eyes were glowing in that moment. This and he said, "Yes, that's my mother." And I was like, "Okay."
Yep. Message
Anyway,
message sent and received.
yeah, and he actually expedited me through security for some reason.
Wow.
So
That's really
it's
cool.
moments like that. It's not on tap like a cheap beer. A lot of
Yeah.
people will come up and be like, "Oh, can you help me make this decision? What do you think of this?" I was sitting in a sauna and I accidentally told somebody what I do. Usually I just say I'm a cultural liaison for France because I don't want to get into it.
Yeah.
Um, and this I accidentally said it, and trusting, and this guy's like, do you sense anything in here? I'm like, we're
A
in a
sauna.
sauna, like I
Yeah.
don't. He's like, yeah, I know, just I'm thinking of this person right now. I'm like, I shouldn't have said anything. I'm a
Yeah.
cultural liaison for France.
That's hilarious. I actually don't mind because I think because I haven't been living with it as long as you have, knowing that I was living with it. So to me, it's still really exciting when I just helped produce a music festival and went up to the bartender and all of a sudden I started to feel spirit there. And I was like, hey, are you religious? And she's like, no, I mean, kinda, not really. And I was like, but I mean, like, are you spiritual? Are you? And she's like, a little bit. And I'm like, but are you like anti-spirituality? I had to kind of feel it out. And I was like, there's a reason I'm asking, and I just want to make sure that you're cool with this. But I was like, there's somebody here. she immediately burst into tears and gave her a reading from her grandpa, and she said, "I've been needing to hear that for 10 years." And I'm like, "That's," I said, "That's why he bothered me. Normally, no one would bother me." But she's like, "I said, he's telling me that you're not sure you believe, and you don't believe he's here, but he's with you all the time." And gave me evidence, lots of different evidence. But she's like, "I've been needing to hear that. She said, "I don't show my feelings. I don't get vulnerable." She said, "I haven't cried. I don't like to think about it." And I said, "Well, he's encouraging you to put that wall down." And she's like, "I needed to hear that." So I said, "Of course, yeah, you did. That's the only reason I felt something. Otherwise, I'd just be going about my business. But you really needed that." And to me, I had time. I was there all day. So to me, I didn't mind doing it. But again, when you've been doing it your whole life, the novelty probably wears off to some degree. I don't know if it does for you, does it?
I don't. Yeah, I guess the novelty is worn off, but I do love every moment of what I do for sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Thank you for sharing that story. That was one of the things I wanted to ask you about is anything that comes to mind. And I know it's a really vague, sort of broad question, but to help illustrate too how why we do this work and how it does help people, can you think of, I'm sure you have hundreds, but specific incidences without obviously breaking client confidentiality, but of really powerful readings that you've had where somebody just needed to hear something or something was really unusual, readings that stood out? Do you have anything like that you can share?
Oh yes, I've got
If
hundreds
you
of
off the top
stories.
of, yeah, I mean, anything you'd like to share, because I think the audience does. I like to talk the mechanics, and they're like, "Well, I'm not a medium, so to me, this is sort of like cool." But I want to hear sort of like what are your experiences and things like that. So I'd love for you to share if you're willing.
Absolutely. So my favorite was well actually there's so many favorites, but the one that comes to mind immediately is I was doing a reading for this young lady and I always get a bit of anxiety going in because I want to give the best reading, but then that's your ego, so I have to remove that and just peel back all the layers and just get to being a conduit. And immediately I'm like, oh, this person wasn't related to you, and I'm starting to see like almost those roll ups in a restaurant, like forks and knives, and somebody coming up and saying something ridiculous to you, like whispering in your ear. And I could see this whole interaction, like a millisecond play out. And then I just saw like the roll ups and then they'd undo themselves. And then I was like, what? I don't know how to make sense of this. So I just blurted it out. And she just burst into tears and she's like, that's exactly who I wanted to connect with. She was my coworker and she passed away just a few months ago, and she was horrible at doing those roll ups, and I'd always have to redo them
Wow.
for her. And when they first met, she went up to her and whispered something ridiculous into her ear because she said that she was having a tough time. And this lady really lightened her mood constantly to remind her that life is so precious, funny enough. And then her name came through, and I got her exact name, her date of birth, and then the month that she died. And I get emotional sometimes, and so I'm feeling all these emotions. My client is not crying or anything, and I'm like, oh my god, this lady is so special, and like I'm feeling everything that comes through with her. And it was quite profound. And then yeah, it was just usually I'll go overtime with that. Overtime is always on me because with mediumship readings, they're such a delicate state of mind, and it's a slippery state of mind too. So I will sometimes set a timer to let me know to come back out of it. But yeah, that was one of the most profound ones.
I love that. I love it for it's just because even when I started studying, I believed it. I'd watched a lot of like Tyler Henry, the Long Island Medium, but I wanted to believe it firsthand because I wanted to know that it wasn't just magical thinking. So when I started studying, I studied with Medium Fleur in LA for a while, and she's phenomenal. She now lives in Portugal, but she does retreats. I'm just kind of shouting her out because she's amazing. And also Monica the Medium, and it's I was amazed with no experience at all going into a workshop, and she walked us through a meditation, and then she's like, "Now I'm pairing you up and I want you to give whatever you're seeing, just let it go." And I was able to do it. And I called my mom on the way home so excited. I'm like, I just did it. Like I went in there going, I have no idea what I'm doing. I won't be able to do this. I'm sure I won't be able to. Everyone can do it if you believe in it. and we're all souls. So I think that's fascinating that you can see something as specific as why would you see roll-ups? That's so specific. And then when you get the name, it's just I've had clients say to me, why are your mouth hanging open?" I'm like, "Because I still am in amazement about it." I mean, it's not about me. It's just what this is crazy. So with that in mind, how I mean, you've had this for so long that it seems so it's very normal to you, but how does it affect the way that you go through your life? Meaning fear of death. A lot of people have a fear of death, for example. How does it sort of uh, inform how you go through your life, how you act? Like you said, you act with service. I love anything that you have to say about that would be really great.
First of all, I don't think everyone can do it. It's not something that is unfortunately universal. I used to think that way as well. Um,
Oh,
I used to think when I was a kid that everyone could paint and write and
yeah.
do all these things that I just do because that's what helps me move emotion through me. And what I've realized is not everyone dreams in color. Not
Oh,
everyone remembers their dreams. Not everyone has that cognitive function to imagine things vividly. If you were to ask quite a few people who are outside of our realm of psychic people, the psychic world, there's quite a few who can't even visualize anything. They can't.
yeah.
It's just not part of their chemical makeup. So that is very a core essential to entering that is starting with clairvoyance, and then it opens up into many different forms. I'm sure they could start to feel things,
Yeah.
but even the other day when I was at a psychic fair and I went to get a coffee before, and there was this horrendous beeping sound going off. And I looked at the guy and said, "Oh, do you hear that in your dreams at night? Are you okay?" And he's like, "Oh, I don't dream." I'm like,
Oh,
"Oh,
yeah, you're right. A lot of my ex-boyfriends didn't dream. Like they just were like, I don't know what you mean.
yeah, it's opposites attract." So to
Yeah,
answer your
yeah.
question about going through day to day, I'm not afraid of death. I never have been. I unraveled that mystery. I'm still unraveling that mystery. You know, I don't, nobody has all the answers. And if they claim to, that's a huge red flag. So I actually volunteer at a hospice part time, 2 days a week. It's not something that I widely talk about, but because I realize that there's a lot of people who are very uncertain, and uncertainty can be breeding ground for fear and anxiety, and that's the opposite of love. So I have an abundance of love for humanity, even though we all have our frustrations with society. My love for humanity and life itself is unwavering. So I learned that through hospice work, it's not about helping or fixing. Those are your ego wanting to interject. This is about quiet communion and sometimes silence and being a healing presence. And just your presence alone can elevate somebody's experience as they're there. Because in our final moments, which are of the same gravity as birth, um, we all imagine that we'd be surrounded by friends, family, and loved ones. And ideally, that's what would happen. But it's not like what they make it out to be in movies. It's not a single moment, it's sometimes weeks, sometimes months. And you are in an unfamiliar place that may or may not feel like home. This place that I chose to volunteer at does feel like everyone's home. When I entered it, I was like, this is what a hospice is. This feels like a really beautiful, very beautiful home. I would want to live here. Like this is so lovely.
Oh, good.
Um, and I've learned that even my um, love for the unknown is transmuted through my presence. So I can sit there. I don't even have to be holding someone's hand. Sometimes they can be in and out of various states of consciousness, and I can lend them my confidence and my love without saying anything or physical touch. So as I go through day to day, I interact with many, 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 many people, and I observe more than anything. I actively listen. I ask open-ended questions. I want to make sure somebody feels validated in their emotions in my presence, without any of the hippie woo-woo elements. I
Yeah.
want to really alleviate a lot of the tension and stress that people are feeling in the world, and a lot of the frustrations that we share with society and the injustices. And then when it comes to a lot of things that I broadcast, even on my Instagram, a friend, as I was getting into it, I started getting lost in the sauce of trying to present this fixing or helping mentality. And he said, anytime you say one of those inspirational quotes, I want you to imagine a small child working in a lithium mine in front of you. Would you say that to them? Would that make their day better? And I'm like, he's like, it's good that you're meeting all of these fantastic people and that you're making yourself busy, but you're going to get lost in all of that superficiality very quickly. It's the path of least resistance. He's like, find what's crucial, really give that moment back to someone who needs to hear it. And it's not just um, superficial empowerment. He's like, I really want you to think of that person who needs a change of circumstances, or perhaps they can't change their circumstances. What do you say to them?
That's beautiful. Yeah. I think that's wonderful too. I have a very strong interest in becoming a death doula, and part of that is doing hospice work. My mom volunteered in hospice too, so and she had some stories, some spiritual stories about people reaching out to seeing their loved ones before they passed. And I think even as you and I know, we can't just be like, "Oh, hi, I'm a medium," but just knowing what we know, it can help exude a sense of comfort because we know what's happening, even if we're not telling them, hey, I'm a medium, and just so you know, you're going to a cool place. Um, are there times where you ever have shared what you do with any of your hospice patients?
No, that would be really tacky.
Yeah. Yeah. I wondered if it came out organically at all, like if they ever said anything like, "Oh, I see my," but yeah, that's the thing is I think we can use it with,
I'm a mystery guest shopper
I
in
love
that
that.
realm. So
Perfect. Yeah, I think just the fact that you have that comfort in you of the lack of fear of death, I think that we can energetically impart that to other people by offering them comfort during that time and just showing empathy for what they're going through, but also kind of, like I said, exuding a sense of peace around it, which I think is beautiful that you're doing that. Um, and so, yeah, that was the other thing is I was going to ask, when you've worked in hospice, have you witnessed any of your patients speaking about people that other people think aren't there or seeing their loved ones?
that's a common occurrence in hospice. And
Yeah.
again, various states of consciousness. Sometimes you may or may not enter a room and they'll say, hey, can you help me pack my bags? And you're like, well, where are you going? Like,
Oh.
they'll start walking you through where they think they're going. So a lot of it is about giving space to what their feelings are. I've learned that emotional pain can hit the body the same as physical pain, and so that's where volunteers come in. And I suppose death doulas as well as alleviating emotional pain by listening,
Mm-hmm.
truly observing and listening. So yes, I've seen people say certain things that would be in the category of mediumship. However, that's quite natural as they shed the layers of ego and start seeing with their eyes. So
Yeah.
I'm there for them, and I will never interject my own beliefs. That's my ego. I'm there to validate that their experience is something that's very real, and to listen to them and ask open-ended questions to allow them to come to their own conclusions. And I started doing that with every single person that I meet outside of hospice. So my ground for learning what's crucial and how to be a better person is through active listening. And I think that's something, if I were to create a change of and leave a legacy behind, it's that I want to actively listen to people around us all the time, because I feel like that's where we get a lot of, it's taking away from the selfish energy of the world. And I think there's so much of that. And that comes from this place of frustration and needing things and wanting things and the whole gamut. So I live very simply. I live very humbly, and I have quite a great degree of unwavering optimism. Sometimes blindly optimistic, um, but that comes from a place of knowing that everything's temporary, and that if you are immersed in a situation that is non-conducive to your growth, that's also temporary. And it's very typical of this too shall pass. But it's more knowing that when you take a look at the big picture of your life, get back to what your values are and what legacy you'd like to leave behind. And we start thinking of that. That's when you can align yourself with active listening as the secret ingredient, and magic things will really happen for everyone around you. It's not about you, it's about everyone around you.
Oh, that's really beautiful, and I love that I think you're right. It's working in hospice or whatever, like you said, just holding space for people, and even though obviously you're not gonna walk into hospice and go, "Hi, I'm a medium," and start talking about that unless they ask you or something, but why would they?
Cultural liaison for France.
Yeah, cultural liaison for France, but I think just in holding that knowledge, like you said, just validating them because I think it's more and more accepted that people are experiencing things. It's not just the drugs. Maybe sometimes it is the drugs, and other times it's not the drugs. But to have someone say, "Yeah, I like to let them tell their truth and explain what they're experiencing without going, "Oh, you just need to lie down," or whatever. I think that's the most beautiful thing, and I know when my grandmother was dying, I talked to her about death a lot because I knew she was lonely and she was angry, and she was starting to lash out just in her confusion, I think, and, I just wanted her to know that, "Hey, we're not brushing over this. We're not pretending this isn't happening. This must be really scary for you." And she was sort of agnostic. And I said, "Look," I gave her a book about near-death experiences, and she was like, "Oh, this is really interesting." And I said, "Look, either way, I don't you'll know when you get there. But I
Mhm.
just hope that in some way there's some comfort in this for you, yeah, like that I can provide some comfort to you. But even if I can, I want you to be able to talk to me about how scared you are and what the feelings are." She wasn't one to really share feelings. I really tried to pull to pull it out of her to let her know I'm here to hold space for you and you can share your anger, your frustration. So I think it is really important that we're doing this, that we're moving towards more discussion about death and taking you're not going to take all the fear out of it. It's scary, the unknown. And I always tell people, I believe this 110%, but I don't know it. I can't tell you that I know all the answers to the universe just because I am a medium or just because I interview near-death experiencers. It doesn't mean I know exactly what happens when you die and you're dead or you're on
Nobody
the other
does.
side. Nobody does. So I just love that, and I love that you keep it to yourself. That's the professional thing to do, but also being able to show love as a human, as a spiritual being is wonderful. Where can we reach you? And tell me if there's anything you'd like to share. Do you teach? Do you just do readings? Are there things coming up for you that you're excited to share?
No, I don't teach. I really, again, wanted to take a look at acts of service, and doing readings for people and I tried getting to the core element of what the healing aspect is as I immerse myself further into this work. And it's, again, validating where somebody's coming from, where they are, and where they're perhaps going without them having to say a word. So
Mm.
that is where the true healing element is with this work. As far as events or anything coming up, I'm getting married in August, so I'm very busy leading up to that.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm happy for you.
So that's the biggest event, and creating content and doing all of my clients in the day, which I'm extremely grateful for. It's been wildly successful, and I'm booked about 3 weeks in advance.
So
Very,
good.
very grateful for that. So just immersing myself in more clients. If you do want to reach me, you can find me at www.thetarotmedium.com, or on Instagram at the tarot medium, and that's TheTarotMedium. I'm on Instagram, YouTube, and my website I've poured a lot of love into. So there's lots
It's a
of
good website. I was noticing that
thank
today.
you.
I'm like, wow, it's comprehensive. It answers all the questions. It's well written. So yeah, and I definitely recommend following you and because you have so much great wisdom to share. You're so young and you're so wise. So I'm just really grateful that you joined me today. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your background and being so vulnerable. It really means a lot.
Well, I loved this. I love chatting with people, and it's a lot easier than just staring into a tiny little hole and saying things to someone who's not there. So it's a lot.
Yeah.
I love communication like this, and you're a fantastic host. So thank you
Thank you
so
so
much for
much.
doing this.